Good evening. My name is Patricia Smith, and I am the Vice President of the Monarch Awards Foundation of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, Xi Nu Omega Chapter. I would like to welcome you to our informational webinar tonight due to a partnership with Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority and the United Nations focused on their 17 Sustainable Development Goals they have outlined to promote global justice and can be found on the United Nations website. Tonight, we will just touch on one of these goals, human trafficking. We plan to discuss what it encompasses, what's happening in the Chicagoland area, and what laws are currently in place or being considered. We have an awesome facilitator, Ms. Sandra Washington, that will help us utilize our short amount of time to bring awareness to this topic. I will now turn it over to Ms. Sandra Washington.
Thank you so much, Patricia. I would also like to welcome you to our webinar this evening. We have a short program this evening, so let's get right down to business. Inside of that 30-minute window, we will have 3 speakers and a Q&A session. Let me tell you a little bit about our speakers this evening. Our first speaker is Dr. Charles Umanu. He's an assistant professor in the Jane Addams College of Social Work at the University of Illinois, Chicago. He's a researcher in the area of human trafficking. He's done research on this topic in the U.S. as well as in Africa. He's going to introduce us to the topic and give us an overview. Our second speaker will be Ms. Felicia Papafio. She's the program director for the Promise program at the Salvation Army. The Promise program works with young women in the Chicago area who've been commercially exploited. And then our third speaker will be Representative L.G.R. Sims. Representative Sims is an Illinois state representative representing the 34th District. He serves as the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee in Springfield and is working on issues related to human trafficking. We'll be able to take your questions, although I want to caution you that because our program is so short, we definitely will not be able to respond to every question. We'll try to ask a few of the questions that we're seeing over and over again. So if you'd like to ask a question, click on the chat icon that you see near the top of your screen and type your question in the chat box. Be sure to address your question to the host, not to any of the presenters. At this time, I'd like to introduce speaker number 1, Dr. Charles Umanu.
Thank you very much, Sandra. So I will define the issue of human trafficking. I will try to do it by using the table you can see probably on the screen. I will start by saying that human trafficking involves the use of force, fraud, or coercion to compel, to oblige a person into commercial sex act or labor or services against his or her will. In other words, looking at the table, I can say that human trafficking occurs when a trafficker or a perpetrator takes one of the actions you see there, recruiting a person, harboring a person, transporting a person, or providing a person, obtaining a person, patronizing a person, or soliciting a person. And then using the means, either force, fraud, or coercion for a specific purpose. For example, for commercial sex act or labor or any type of services. This is called the AMP model. So, at a minimum, one element needs to be identified in each of the columns. If we can identify one action and can identify one means and one purpose, you are sure that there is an issue of human trafficking. So, for example, if we know a person who recruits a child and use force, let me forget about child. recruit anyone by force and then put them in prostitution, that is human trafficking. Now, coming down to children, when we see any child in prostitution, let's say in general in the sex trade, any child in that business is considered a victim of human trafficking, regardless of the use of force, fraud, or coercion. Now, it's important to notice something. You see the words patronizing and soliciting. These terms were added in the Justice Victim Trafficking Act of 2015, which means that even a person who is not a trafficker and is trying to is a John is a person using a victim, is considered today as a sex trafficker. Now, it's important to know that there are different forms of human trafficking. Talking about the origin, we have international trafficking, which involves victims who are not citizens, like non-citizens, who are, for example, in the U.S. Then we have domestic trafficking. Domestic trafficking involves only citizens and legal permanent residents. So we can say that in the U.S., when a child is a victim of prostitution, a child below 18, the child is a victim of human trafficking. It can happen that someone will be taken from the south side of Chicago to the north side of Chicago and forced into prostitution. This person is a victim of human trafficking. So let me back up a little bit and say, okay, when you see a lady who is in prostitution as a sex worker, if she is doing it willingly, she's not a victim. Once she has someone forcing her into doing that, she becomes a victim of human trafficking. Okay, beyond that, let me talk about labor trafficking and sex trafficking. Labor trafficking, it's when you force someone to do any kind of work for you against their will. It can include also something we call domestic servitude. Some international people bring children in or women to work in their houses, in the private precincts. This is domestic servitude, and it is not acceptable. Then you have debt bondage. Sometimes people bring others from abroad and pay for their trip, everything, and now keep their paperwork and say, you have to pay me back by working for me. Pay your debt. And it never ends. That's debt bondage. We need to know all these. Now, sex trafficking. Sex trafficking is the most prevalent one in the U.S. When you talk about sex trafficking, anyone who has been forced, who has been used in sexual exploitation is a victim of sex trafficking. Talking about children, when you talk about child trafficking, you see labor, child labor, and you see child sex trafficking. Child sex trafficking is called today commercial sexual exploitation of children. We call CSEC. CSEC includes child prostitution, child pornography. You have also child sex tourism and trafficking of children for sexual exploitation. These are the four forms of CSEC. A child viewed in seen in any of these forms is a victim and should not be treated at all as a criminal. That's why today, if the police arrest any child on the way, anywhere, and the child even say, I'm doing it by myself, it's my desire, the child needs help and should be removed from that situation. And any joint with a child, we can be in trouble. Then there is a last form of trafficking, which is growing now, what is a trafficking in person for organ removal. So I cannot say in the U.S. It's prevalent in the U.S., but China is the country where it is well known that people kidnap others and try to remove their organs to be used for people. I won't talk about the issue of trafficking in babies. It happens in Asia, in Africa, and so on. So I will stop there for now, and I will answer questions later.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Humanu. You've given us a really good introduction to the topic. Before I introduce the next speaker, I want to remind you, if your video's on, please turn it off. And I also want to remind you that if you have a question, you can type it in the chat box, click on the chat bubble at the top of your screen, type your question, address it to the host. At this time, I'd like to introduce speaker number 2, Ms. Felicia Papafia.
Thank you, Sandra, for your introduction. I appreciate you guys for having me here. And here's a little information about our program. We're a non-for-profit organization, and we do not receive any government funding. We're all donation-based, and our program is free to our clients. We have 2 entities of promise. The first component is the training and educating of different agencies on human trafficking, sex trafficking, and sexual exploitation. And of course, if we're educating, we have to help this population. The second component is our long-term trauma-based facility, servicing girls ages 12 to 21 in residential. We help young women and girls affected by human and sex trafficking to recover from trauma and acquire the skills needed to lead healthy and purposeful lives free from abuse and exploitation. I've been working at Ann's House for close to 6 years, and out of 100%, 90% of the girls that I've done an intake on have been sexually abused or raped. For them, they feel like they've lost some type of innocence when taken from them, which may have caused like low self-esteem to our clients. And as time progresses, some, not all, may have mental health issues, such as PTSD, depression, mood disorder, and bipolar disorder. They become rebellious towards their parents due to the anger that they have within, and oftentimes they run away from home. So when your self-esteem is low, after all you've been through regarding this population, and a pimp disguises himself as an ordinary man and stops you on the streets and says, "Hey, young lady, you're so beautiful." By week 2, he's buying you things that you've never had. By week 3, he's telling you he loves you, and he's your boyfriend. By week 4, he's saying, "If you love me, then you'll do this for me." And at this age, these young ladies are so impressionable and want to be loved that they fall victim to being sex trafficked. So when clients are referred to us, I complete the intake assessment. Girls are referred to our program by other social service agencies like ours, FBI agents, behavioral health hospitals like Hartgrove, Rivers Edge, Garfield Park, juvenile detention centers, and oftentimes we have people seek us out on their own. When the girls enter our program, the goal is to make sure that they experience some type of normalcy. Oftentimes, these girls come from broken homes and situations. So at Ann's House, we provide intensive case management, individual and group therapy, medical care, educational and vocational services, art therapy, social and recreational activities, life skills training, spiritual guidance, and support. Girls are responsible for doing chores, maintaining their grades, following rules in the program, and as many of you all who are parents out there, we also put our clients on punishment and attend parent-teacher conferences. Like any program, we face challenges with some of our clients. They learn certain behaviors when they're out being trafficked. They learn to lie. They learn to steal, hoard, live a life based off dishonesty. So they bring some of those characteristics into the program. And these are things that we're all used to, and we help our clients, achieve some of getting out of those type of negative behaviors. And some girls, run away and run back into the lifestyle. Some girls complete the program and go on to other residential programs and get their own apartments or in college. And so since I've been in the position, we've had about 50 girls come into our program and about 20 to 25 success stories. We have former residents who call and say, "Hey, I didn't understand what you all were teaching me then, but I definitely understand now, so I called to say thank you." And so that makes us happy because it lets us know that we are planting seeds for our clients. What I think state legislators can do to help this population is by putting lockdown facilities in the state of Illinois, because there aren't any. With the budget being cut for mental health services, so when a girl runs away and goes back into the lifestyle, when she's found by law enforcement and returned to the program like ours, you try to get her admitted into a behavioral health hospital in which they decline admittance because she's not deemed as an endangerment to herself. She runs back into the lifestyle, and unfortunately, there's only so much programs like ourselves can do from that point on.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Ms. Papafio. That's very interesting. Clearly, you're doing important work in our community. Again, excuse me, Again, I want to remind you one more time, if you'd like to ask a question, you can click on the chat bubble at the top of your screen and type your question into the chat box. At this time, I'd like to introduce speaker number 3. Our third speaker is Representative L.G. Sims.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks for having me. And let me first start out by thanking the wonderful women of Alpha Kappa Alpha, as I know Omega chapter, for their leadership in this issue and putting a light on a very troubling issue that people don't often want to talk about. And that's what has led my work in this area. As I mentioned in the introduction, I serve as the chairman of the House Judiciary Criminal Committee, and I've got the opportunity to witness a number of pieces of legislation that come through addressing this area. And part of the challenge has been overcoming the stigma of human trafficking. And by that I mean oftentimes, the statements will be something along the lines of, well, they could just speak up, or they didn't have to do it in the first place. And what you heard, as one of the previous speakers talked about, you heard the process of grooming an individual into the life. And you heard that process of how a young woman or a young man, because often it's not just women who are trafficked. And I think that's part of the overcoming the stigma that we have to do. We have to understand that this is a problem. This is a $32 billion industry worldwide. And what we are seeing, particularly in the Chicagoland area, the Chicagoland area is the Midwestern hub of human trafficking. So what we have been trying to do on the legislative front, let me start with one of the laws that I passed in this area. So I passed a law a year ago, Senate Bill 1588, should be on your screen now, and it provides an affirmative defense to the charge of prostitution when the accused is engaged or performing prostitution as a result of being a victim of involuntary servitude or trafficking. So what we're finding is, again, we're having states attorneys that were charging these women or these persons who've been trafficked, and expecting that the person would speak up against their trafficker. And what you heard in that grooming scenario is that oftentimes it's not realistic. The person is not going to speak up in open court and say, my abuser is right there, because they know that will lead to further abuse. And what we were finding is that the criminal justice system was then recriminalizing these people who had been trafficked. So it's the law that I passed created an affirmative defense that would say, if you have been charged with if you've been charged with the crime of prostitution, you could then raise the defense that you have been trafficked to allow as your defense of the charges against you. So and what was important is that third bullet point was that those statements by the accused are then done in an in-camera hearing with the judge, which means out of court. So it's in a private hearing with the judge, state's attorney, and the accused and their counsel, so that person does not have to make the allegations in open court or has to or assert the defense in open court. And that's important, because if the person is ever going to get out of the life and be able to free themselves of the condition, if we want to encourage them to speak up, we can't certainly be criminalizing victims. We can't certainly expect that they will try to speak out against someone who's been victimizing them, and someone who they have. And when we have to realize that the victims are people, and as they've gone through this grooming process, they've grown to have feelings for their pimp, or for the person who's trafficked them. So they now have feelings, and they're now being controlled mentally by this other person. So you want to make sure that they have the ability to then move themselves out of the situation. So then now in addition to that new law, there are other pieces of legislation that are out there. And I'm very proud of some of the reforms that we're making on the criminal justice front, and that includes this area. Because what we're trying to do, again, is make sure that as we reform our criminal justice system, we are looking at it holistically, and we're trying to stop taking this one-size-fits-all approach to people who are coming into contact with the criminal justice system. Not everyone is a suspect, and because you commit crime, that's why you have affirmative defenses that can explain why a person committed a crime or why a person engaged in certain behavior. So what I have outlined here are several of the bills that have been that are currently under consideration by the 100th General Assembly, which is the current General Assembly. And what you'll see is there are a couple of which are extensions in the statute of limitations when there's an allegation of a sex crime or a person is a victim of a sex crime. And that's important because if you've been engaged in this lifestyle for quite some time, it may not dawn on you until years later that you've been trafficked or that you've been engaged in this lifestyle, and it's taking you a while to break away. So we've tried to make sure we've extended the timeline that people can bring the charges, so that we give them the opportunity to get themselves out of their life, turn their lives around, and give them opportunities to better themselves and their condition. One other bill I wanted to point out before I move on, and we go to questions because I know our time is short, is a bill that requires the Secretary of State, which is House Bill 1677, requires the Secretary of State to include information on spotting human trafficking and human trafficking in their commercial driver's license curriculum. That's important because, as I mentioned, with Chicago and the Chicagoland area being the Midwestern hub for human trafficking, it's important that individuals who are driving trucks, and they can spot the conditions around them. They can spot what is happening, and they can see if someone is being trafficked, if there are conditions that exist that demonstrate that there's trafficking around, or if they think there's something that looks suspicious. They can then reach out to law enforcement to make sure that law enforcement steps in and intervenes to make sure that the situation is stopped. So I'll stop there and wait any questions. But again, thank you for joining the webinar, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you this evening.
Thank you very much, Representative Sims. We are really grateful to have legislators like you who understand the importance of this issue. In the time that we have left, I'd like to pose just a few questions to some of our speakers. I'm going to ask the speakers to limit their responses to just 1 minute, if that's possible. I know all of you have a great deal to say on this topic. Dr. Umino, though, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned sex trafficking being most prevalent in the U.S. Is there a difference in the kind of trafficking you see, in the kind of human trafficking you see in the U.S. as compared to Africa, where you have also observed this and done research?
Thank you for your question. As I said, yes, sex trafficking is highly prevalent in the U.S., but when you turn to Africa, where I conducted a three-country study in 2014, we can say that the issue of child trafficking is the most prevalent. And I'm sure Ms. Papafio will agree with me. And because of poverty, people exploit the children in different kind of ways. So the issue of sex trafficking is prevalent, but not as much as child trafficking. Child trafficking, mostly, I would say, child labor. You see people using children in fishing, in markets, on plantations. Most of cocoa you get from Ivory Coast is produced by children. So that's the most prevalent issue in Africa, not sex trafficking.
Okay, labor trafficking. That's very interesting. You're using the word children. I want to go to Felicia Papafio and talk about the children. Like, what age ranges do you see among the young women that you're working with? What are the ages that you're talking about?
We usually get girls that are 12 through 21. There have been some cases where I have seen 11-year-olds who have been commercially exploited here in Chicago.
That's really just hard to imagine. And what kind of, the other question I want to ask you is about your success rate for your program. How effective are you in being able to turn the lives around of the young women that you see? What's your success rate like?
It depends on the client. If that client is ready to, change, because, some of them, like the state rep stated, that, some of these girls are conditioned, that this particular guy is my boyfriend. And so I need to get back to him. He's going to be mad at me, And some girls who are able to break away from that, and there's a transformation of the mind coming from us to help them. Our success rate is a little bit higher when it comes to girls who are actually ready to leave and walk away from that lifestyle.
Okay, good. Thank you. Representative Sims, I have one question for you as well. You were talking about SB 1588. Do you have any way of knowing how successful it's been so far? So this has already been enacted, right, if I'm understanding. Do you have any way of knowing how successful it's been?
Well, I can tell you that the law has been picked up in about 30 states across the country. So there's clearly a national trend towards making sure that we are providing this type of defense for people victims of human trafficking, so that they're able to move themselves out of their condition. And we've talked about the circumstances that have led to the conditions we're talking about here today. It really is very, very difficult for these young people to break away. And the problems, and Ms. Papafio, she mentioned, and I can't agree with her more, as we are starting to see the disinvestment in mental health funding and trauma funding and all the other things. Those things are the problems manifest themselves in the challenges that people face in a number of different areas. So it's going to be incumbent upon us to continue to have these discussions and to stay ever vigilant and to make sure that we're working on this and other issues of this type.
Okay. Representative Sims, I have one more question for you. We'll need to keep it real short if you can. I know this is going to be a complex question. But what are some of the signs of trafficking that ordinary citizens can watch for? How can we know? How do we know what to watch for?
Well, I'm certainly not an expert. I would defer that to the experts. I would think that I would defer that to the experts.
Okay. I'm going to ask Dr. Umanu to respond to that one.
Okay. I will say something like this. When you want to know if someone is a victim, you look for the following clues: evidence of being controlled, evidence of inability to move or leave a job, bruises or other signs of physical abuse, fear or depression, the person not speaking on own behalf or non-English speaking person, no passport or other forms of identification or documentation the person has. So you can ask questions to people like, what type of work do you do? Are you being paid? Can you leave your job if you want to? Can you come and go as you please? Have you or your family been threatened? What are your working and living conditions like now? Where do you sleep? Such questions can help you know if a person is a victim. Any no to these questions, you know that the person is not free. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, what I see is along the lines of consistent running away from home. A lot of people think that, commercial exploitation is just trading, sex for money. No, it can also be trading sex for a place to stay. And so when you're running away, you need somewhere to stay. You need food, you need clothes. That's also being exploited. So those are some of the things that you can pay attention to when you see kids who are constantly, if they're not in school, especially girls, if they're out and they're constantly running away. Troubled teens, that's a big factor that a lot of people, don't see. And if your child or, whoever sex drive is high, is very high, Sometimes, we have to pay attention to signs of being, sexually abused or, raped. So those are some indicators.
Okay, good. Thank you. I just want to say to those of you who are listening, we realize we've run over time just a few minutes. We are going to wrap it up, but we had questions that we wanted to make sure that we got the answers to, and so that was why we've taken this extra time. So we've introduced you to this important issue. Now there's something that we need to have you do. Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated is working in partnership with United Nations to circulate an online petition calling for justice for all people around the world. We ask that you stand for justice by copying this link into your browser and signing on to the online petition. And if you're calling in, I'll read it to you. It is unausa.org/stand-for-justice. And we'll show this on the screen again in just a minute. Today is the last day for those petitions, so do that right after you get off the webinar. Also, those of you who've been participating today, there'll be a survey. We will be emailing that to you. We ask that you return the survey so we get an idea how we've done. We want to thank you so much for joining us this evening, and I want to close out by our hearing just a few words from our president.
Good evening. My name is Kelly Gantz. I'm the president of Monarch Awards Foundation. I want to thank you for attending this evening's webinar on human trafficking. I learned a lot this evening. I hope you did too. I hope the information we provided was valuable. If you have not yet done so, please sign the digital petition. Again, thanks for joining our webinar. Have a great evening.
Okay, thank you and good night.